time for the comments.
Okay, so then let's start with the introduction. So for those who are for the first time here, I would say that these weekly policy seminars, usually they are held in Ukrainian, but sometimes we have English. That the speaker who speaks in English, yeah, but in English. So next Wednesday we have Alexei Martin, Professor of Sales, who will talk about sales of vulnerable property in cities, towns, and wider communities. And today we have Gregor Simeon, the head of the Medicine Center Mission in Ukraine, who will talk about humanitarian response, actions, and some experience of this in Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much, Lona, and thank you all for coming. I met a few of you from the previous seminar, but briefly to introduce myself, and then we can go around to see your expectations also from the class. So my name is Grigor, I'm head of mission with MSF, Doctors Without Borders. MSF stands for Médecins Sans Frontières, the French name. And I have been working in Ukraine for 6 months now. Previously I've worked in Pakistan, in South Sudan, Zimbabwe, Swaziland, and this is my first time working in Ukraine. So I think it would be good to go around quickly and see what expectations we have in this seminar. And today we're going to speak about armed conflict today, but from gender perspective, and see how is it important to have gender, age-sensitive policies when building humanitarian programs. Just to briefly name and your expectations, if we can go. We start from there.
My expectations, I'm interested in gender-related research in economics, especially in labor economics, and I did some studies on IDP, so it is interesting to look at this gender perspective for humanitarian assistance. Exactly your topic.
Thank you.
For me, it's just general interest. It's not really related to my research area, but since we live in the conflict-affected countries.
Just general interest in armed conflict.
We can start like this.
I think the title fits my expectations, but probably I'm looking young people needs and how your mission.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't included youth. There are 3 groups that I've singled out as a vulnerable group, which is children, of course, elderly, and women. There is lots of material on children and women. There is very little about elderly people, so I tried to integrate also some material about the elderly.
I work in the think tanks that deals with some aspects of the conflict, so it's interesting for me how to advise to include gender and age issues to the policy.
Okay.
Expectations from this.
Hello, my name is Pavel Loshin, I'm a research associate at TSG. I have a working paper on armed conflict in eastern Ukraine, so it's a good idea to do something in this area.
Alright, thanks.
Hi, I'm Nico. I'm the communications manager for myself, so you might see me taking some photos for our Facebook page. It's up there. I'm excited just to learn more about your perspective on vulnerable groups and conflict.
My name is Roxalana, and I'm writing my master thesis on the access to justice for women victims of sexual violence around conflicts. So, and since I'll be analyzing also the armed conflicts in the eastern Ukraine, I want to write about the recommendations how to better face the challenges for women in armed conflicts. So I'm just looking for more inspiration and ideas.
We'll be covering sexual violence, sexual gender-based violence.
Hello, I'm Sophia, and I'm just interested in gender topics.
My name is Nicola. Actually, I really like the previous seminar, so I also expect to learn something new from this one.
My name is Elena Gomez. I work in the Research Institute, and since we deal with the current with the armed conflict, so from time to time we analyze data, and my interest is general, to see how it can be analyzed in different perspectives. And my PhD was about gender.
Hello, my name is Olga. I used to work for a project dealing with IDPs human rights, and that's why I'm interested in vulnerabilities. And I also follow the course in humanitarian action. For me it's interesting to see what is the role of MSF and how it fits into the landscape, while there are other actors like UNICEF and other organizations. So what is your particular role? And of course I would like to hear about your perspective, because you told that you worked in South Sudan and Zimbabwe, so I guess you can do something.
Yes, I'll share my experience, of course. Thanks. Yes.
Hi, I'm Marina. I'm mostly working with international trade, so this is not directly,
Your field of
doesn't really
expertise.
not exactly my area of expertise, but I'm very much interested in gender-sensitive policy making in that respect.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks for organization.
Hi, my name is Olga, and I'm interested in gender aspects of conflict and more information on that.
All right. Thanks.
My name is Olga, and I've worked for several positions in women's human rights protection, and also some projects in emergency project in the East, and that's why it's very interesting for me to get more about the perspective and MSF, how they're dealing with this.
Okay.
My name is Andrew Wilson. I work for the OSCE monitoring mission. I've been in the Donetsk region for the last 2 years, and so I'm trying to strive for more gender-inclusive reporting and finding ways to include gender in our monitoring mechanisms is something that I'm very interested in.
All right. Thanks.
My name is Anastasia, and I also work with MSF, but I would really like to learn more about how inclusion can be achieved in humanitarian action.
Well, my name is Alina. I'm working on with different human rights organizations in Ukraine, and I'm interested in protection of children in Ukraine.
All right. Thanks all. In case of language, it's not native language for many of us in this room, but if there are questions you would like to repeat, please let me know. So what we have for this class, I have some pictures. I don't know if it's visible for everybody. So we're going to speak about gender, then we're going to speak about humanitarian assistance, and we're going to speak about conflict and how we can gender humanitarian assistance and how we can gender armed conflict. So if we speak about gender, how do we differentiate gender and sex? Just to be sure that we're clear with the definitions before we dive into the topic. Can I have some help on it? Yes, please.
See, I think that gender is not biological.
It's more of a discursive, constructed understanding that is ascribed to masculinity or femininity. So, therefore, neither conflict nor humanitarian assistance could stay outside of gender perspective and gender analysis. I understand that speaking about conflict, maybe it would be more interesting to this audience to speak about the economy of conflict, but I chose to speak about gender because this is the topic that is more frequently left out when we speak about the armed conflict. So this is a picture with ICRC and Red Cross from Syria. We have Megan, who is ambassador for UNHCR, if I'm not mistaken. Another UNHCR ambassador. This is a group of people waiting for WFP. It's a picture from South Sudan. They're waiting for their WFP food rations that WFP does on regular basis distribution. And these are children from Uganda, children that have been kidnapped and recruited by LRA, Lord's Resistance Army, which is the most notorious rebel group so far. It has been recruiting children, making them into child soldiers. So if we go into these pictures and try to see how gender is important and how it's visible. So humanitarian assistance, as it started with ICRC, there was a few with religious backgrounds, nurses who have started giving assistance to the wounded people at the war, after the war. So it was a very female, charitable deed that they did. But with time, we have other elements that have penetrated into humanitarian assistance. And one of them that we discussed the previous time was militarization of humanitarian assistance. So it has become more and more masculine dimension where we have to speak about security, when we have to speak about protection, the rights. So times have changed how we see humanitarianism as a gendered construct. When speaking about gender perspective, I don't want to narrow down to men and women to discuss how many men are directors or how many women are directors in humanitarian agencies, though the difference is quite big. You would think that this is not banking system, this is humanitarian system. You would think that at least there is equality. There isn't. It's like absolute majority in the sector are men. But when speaking about gender, it's also important to speak about race, because we're trying to have a feminist approach, feminist scholarly approach, and look outside the box. So let's not focus only about masculine and feminine men and women, but also include the topic of race. And I think every humanitarian organization has a poster of a white woman rescuing a black child. So this is quite, unfortunately, a typical picture in the posters, and many humanitarian assistants have pictures like this on their Facebook profiles. So there is also the racial part, which is important. This picture I've chosen because, again, the gender stereotypes penetrate into different aspects, including receiving humanitarian assistance. So food distribution by WFP, when you go to the lines to see who is in the line for food distribution, you will never see their man. When you have a vaccination campaign, you will see mothers and children. So the gender roles are universal. In every place you will have different gender roles ascribed to men and mothers and the fathers on what they should do. And of course it's used, it's exploited, it's used for good, it's used for bad, and it's exploited a lot, both in humanitarian sector, it's exploited by policymakers, it's exploited by militia who are recruiting people into the army. So these are quite common occurrences in our work in different countries to different levels. And of course, LRA, which is again military, so with the guns you can see the baby girls with the guns taking the picture. So it's also very masculine. So if we go to gendering armed conflict, what is the conflict all about? How would you describe conflict otherwise? It's about power relations. It's power relations of two sides in the conflict, two warring parties. But again, the power relations penetrate the family, power relations penetrate between male, female, day-to-day relationship at all levels. So if we speak of power relations in conflict, we will understand why gender relations and gender perspective is so important when building humanitarian programs in armed conflict, which is an area where power relations are dictating everything. And again, speaking about gender relation. It's not just femininity, that is also masculinities, that is very important, that in many cases can be a driving force in conflicts or driving force in organization of humanitarian assistance. We'll speak about feminist research and how is it different. I couldn't understand it myself for a long time, but I was following a research. A researcher was my fellow student. She's a genocide scholar, and she was presenting at TED Talk, and she was speaking about her experience from Rwanda. And she was speaking about the concept of justice that we also discussed. You brought up about justice. She was speaking also about justice, about perception of what is just and what is unjust. And her research was bringing the male perspective over justice and the female perspective over justice, and how to achieve justice. It doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. And her examples were from Rwanda, and she was speaking that people now, after the genocide in Rwanda, they live together. They know very well that their neighbor was involved in killing of the relatives, but they managed somehow to reconcile and to move on. Of course, there is also a heavy fist that is pushing the reconciliation. There has been DDR, there has been transitional justice. I was saying, like, the male perspective over justice would be to identify whose fault is it, to measure the gravity of the misconduct, the crime, whatever, and to give the relevant punishment, correction. In your legal language you call it differently, I see already 2 smiles. But this is how she was interpreting that the man would expect the justice to be. Whereas when she was speaking to survivors of genocide, her experience showed that many of the people she spoke to, they were not looking to identify who did what. They were not looking for punishment. They were not looking for revenge, but they were looking to tell their story. So they were quite comfortable to continue living with the same neighbor, but they wanted to be heard. So acknowledgement is also justice, which is not the case in our universally accepted justice system, that acknowledgement alone could do the job. So we'll have a feminist perspective over research, which you can argue this case. I think it's a very interesting case that illustrates how different it can be, the feminist scholarship versus the analysis of justice that we encounter on a daily basis. And we'll try to build this seminar more of a trying to look outside the box and see different angles of things. The main core parts of the seminar will be about the vulnerabilities of different groups. When we speak war, like who are the ones fighting, who is the military? It's man. It's man fighting man. If you take a bigger period of post-conflict development, so man fight man, man die. You take a bigger period and you will find out that the female mortality is much higher than male mortality when it's only man fighting the only man here. And I'm not speaking of civilian deaths in general. How can we explain? Why is it possible that during conflict it's man fighting man, and if you take a longer period you will have more women, more female mortality? How would you explain it?
Maybe interpersonal minds can be one of reasons in some situations.
Minds? It can be, yes. Other answers?
Because women are more vulnerable without breadwinner. Without their breadwinners in their families. No one to fight for existence, to fight for, for bread.
Yes.
What are the reasons of this mortality?
Well, this is what Well, the reasons of why female mortality grows higher is because when you have the infrastructure, let's say health infrastructure changes, where women would go to deliver children. So you have maternal mortality extremely high. If you don't have health infrastructure, you lose the health infrastructure. If you lose again the health infrastructure, you will have no vaccination, so there will be higher mortality for children who didn't get vaccinated, for infectious diseases. Women and children, especially pregnant, lactating women and children, will be more vulnerable if there is lack of nutrition, undernutrition. So the reasons are various, and armed conflict will have more devastating effect on women and children if you take a longer period than, well, if you take only the period during the conflict with men. But we'll try to include children during this seminar. We'll speak about health, nutrition, and education, and some policies that have been put in place for education. For example, if there is lack of education during protracted conflict, we take South Sudan. 35, 36 years of protracted conflict is happening. Chances of conflict stopping, very slim, because literacy rate and education level is so low. So when you have big number of people without employment, without education, so the source of income, the source of livelihood will be fighting. So you stop one militia group, you start another militia group, then you start another militia group. So why there is so much resources going also into education, even during protracted conflict, because it's another way of preventing rise of new militias, etc. So we'll speak about children, we'll speak about women, including health, nutrition, and sexual violence. But let's not forget that it's not only women that are exposed to sexual violence, it's also children, it's also men. Of course, the majority, absolute majority of elderly people, absolute majority of cases are against women. However, not to leave out also men, and not to leave out also children who are subject to sexual slavery, sexual rape, etc. And about older people, elderly, this is a topic that I've been trying to research more and find out more information, but unfortunately I couldn't. Not because of my Google search was not working, it's because there is very little research and very little investment on elderly care, and Ukraine is one of the cases that we hear over and over that in eastern Ukraine, elderly people are suffering armed conflict and it's disproportionate. So we will speak also about the elderly nutrition, health and protection. So we already spoke about conflict being a question of power relations. There is the military power that we already spoke, there is the economic power, but there is also the question of security, of what makes us secure and what other international organizations can deliver to make security. So the Canadian example of definition of security would be freedom of fear, and the other definition, which is the UNDP definition, is more comprehensive. It's safety for people, both from violent and non-violent threats. So conflict is about power relations. Power relations is about gender relations as well. So using conflicts, we heard many times rape is a weapon of war, slavery, etc. So power relations between gender and power relations in armed conflict are very easily transferable and affect and are demonstrated in different forms, both in gender relations and during armed conflict. But we have quite a few more bit slides here too. So, and again, not to speak only about femininity, also to speak about masculinity. This is an example that I have from mobilization of Taliban when Taliban was started like after the conflict with the USSR invasion, then the US support, when Taliban started mobilizing people and attracting people, especially in rural areas. So what was important, how they use gender for mobilization, how they use masculinity for mobilization. And especially the last sentence, Taliban were able to dispense justice and reclaim dignity of men who have been unable to protect their wives, mothers, sisters, and daughters. So this was the main mantra that was used, the masculinity. This is a phrase I think we all are familiar about, brothers having the role of protecting and fathers having the role of defending. And so this was one of the ways that masculinity and gender was used for mobilization in Afghanistan. And of course, when we speak about religious mobilization or religious interpretation of gender, we have many more examples to come. In Iraq, when the conflict started, what was pointed out about Taliban, what was very important, the references that were used. The first reference used by George Bush to describe the radical terrorist world, it was about repression. It described Taliban as repression. Repression of what? We're speaking about repression of gender. So the first reference, insinuation over what we're speaking about is about repression of women, how gender has been again used and exploited for all good and right reasons, not for me to judge here, to launch, to stop an armed conflict. So again, the role of gender. We have similar cases right now in global politics. Case of Iran, use of headscarves as a repression for women and liberation of women. So when the conflict started, it was not about occupation, it was about liberation of women. So gender plays both explicit and illicit role in developing, mediating conflicts, starting conflicts, at the same time reaching for peace. So when we speak about vulnerability, the first group that comes, children. So this is a picture from Yemen, and this was taken during our last, well, the conflict is ongoing. The first thing that happens, why children are more vulnerable. Can we come up with some examples of why children are more vulnerable to armed conflict?
They can be forced to join the army as a vulnerabilities.
Forced recruitment is part of the case. I have experienced myself from South Sudan when I was escorted out of a government meeting by a guy who was shorter than his gun. It was, and every holiday we had cases when people were wounded, when these kids were trying to shoot in the air to celebrate. The guns are heavier than them, so they would always, and then we would have received the patients coming. So yes, this is one of the things, but before the age of 13 to go to army, there is the under 5 vulnerability, which is very big.
You cannot take care of themselves without
They're very dependent. At the breastfeeding age, when we come back to nutrition, it's very, so in breastfeeding age, if the mother doesn't eat enough, the mother won't be able to breastfeed the child, and it seriously affects. So you can have a severe malnutrition, but at the same time, when you have it on regular basis from generation to generation to generation, we have cases like big number of stunting children, like chronically malnourished in India. It affects development of brain. So even if situations change, you will still have 2-3 generations of people, children, who grew up, but not with the same intellectual capabilities to earn enough money to master professions to move forward. So nutrition is one of the big factors. Of course, healthcare is the other big factor. And the vulnerability of children is because they are just unable to make their own decisions and do things for themselves. So they are fully dependent on their parents' choices and decisions. So when there is a health infrastructure and then the health infrastructure is disrupted. So these are certain cases in different contexts. Of course, if we speak about Somalia or South Sudan, there is no health infrastructure to have it interrupted. But when you have health infrastructure and then the health infrastructure gets interrupted, what happens is antenatal care is missing, which is the newborn children won't be able to see, won't be seeing a nurse, a midwife, a doctor when needed. They will not receive their vaccination. So measles, meningitis, rabies, the MMR, the first main important ones when they don't receive. And it significantly increases mortality rate. In Ukraine, you have the cases, but it's very different meningitis outbreaks here or meningitis outbreaks in other places. So in South Sudan, again, my example, I've done a few times there. If you have meningitis outbreaks, mortality is extremely high. You have 5 cases who declare an outbreak as part of mass vaccination. So vaccination gets interrupted, food security gets interrupted. Infectious diseases. The first killer in the world is what? Which?
Diarrhea.
Gastrointestinal diseases and respiratory diseases. These are the first 2 things which are the most popular things. So if you're in a context of armed conflict, conflict affects not only the building of hospital, but also access to clean water. So as a result of which diarrheal diseases are very high. And which animal kills most? Mosquitoes. So malaria, mostly we're speaking of malaria, and you have huge malaria outbreaks, which is very easy to treat, but children don't get the treatment because of disruption of health infrastructure. Nutrition is one of the biggest things, and again, at different phases of childhood, different nutrition is needed. It's needed to have the microvitamins, proteins, etc., etc. So having disbalanced nutrition is already a problem. When one has disbalanced, not timely and limited nutrition, it's a much bigger problem. So a policy that has been issued and it has been supported by UNICEF, and now it has become a common practice among humanitarian workers, was who should receive the food rations, like WFP was distributing. So there was a research and they noticed that if it's the mother who receives the food rations versus if it's the father, who is the head of the family, receives the food rations. How it's distributed. And the research showed that when it's the woman who receives the food rations, the food is distributed to everybody in the family. Otherwise, it's not that the man don't give enough food to the children, the man prioritized more the hierarchy in the family. So the older, the head of the family, it would be the father-in-law, mother-in-law, and then the food would trickle down to the youngest, so the children would get the list of the nutrition. So the child-infant mortality was very high. So the research endorsed by UNICEF as well, which is the UN Fund for Children, shows that if mothers are receiving, it is proportionately and equally distributed to all family members. So this is a gender-sensitive policy that has been implemented in humanitarian world, and it was quite an older practice. Similarly, a new practice that is 2 years now that is in function is cash distribution. So more and more in humanitarian world before, there was much less trust and confidence in beneficiaries. So the distribution was for food. So you get food because if you don't get food, you get cash, you will go, you will sell it, and you will buy alcohol. The general description. So now more and more cash distributions have become a practice. Oxfam was one of the leading agencies who was facilitating the cash distribution initiative. Mercy Corps as well, and it proved quite effective. And again, the research shows that when the women are the recipients of the cash distribution project, what happens is women are more inclined towards investing the cash that they received to generate more income. So they would start their tea corners next to their house, buy something and sell something, so that the money would generate something and it would be a longer used cash, the assistance would last longer, versus if the men are the recipients of the assistance, it would be like a one-go purchase and would finish. So these are stereotyping men and women, but these two examples are results of quite thorough evidence-based analysis that diverted humanitarian assistance for something else. And education. We have another slide on education. Access to drinking water and education, we have already spoken. All right, before going, let me do this slide. So this is the case of Syria, about what happened before the armed conflict and what is happening right now. And the last point is about enrollment to school and attendance to school, which is last year, if I read from my computer, is 2013, it starts dropping. Why education makes such a big difference is because education is not only about education today, it's also about being able to put your knowledge, to put your skills to generating income in the future. Otherwise, cases from Colombia, FARC, you're familiar with FARC in Colombia? Yes. So if we go back to examples of FARC, when over 60 years there has been the rebel group FARC, and Colombia is implementing DDR program, disarmament, demobilization and reintegration of militia back into the community. It's only these last years that they have reached success. So what's happening is people who are being reintegrated into the community because of their lack of knowledge, lack of skills, lack of survival skills of what to do. Okay, I'm a rebel, I came to Kiev. I need to have something to do to feed myself, to say nothing of family. So if I don't find anything else to do, I'll relapse, in other words. So I'll have to go back to being the rebel, being the thief, selling drugs, because I don't have survival skills in a new society. So education, the role of education, which is under UNICEF, it's education cluster, it's managed under UNICEF. So there are lots of initiatives in Syria, especially in context of protracted conflict, to make sure that at least the basics is there. Syria was a country with very high level of literacy, with strong professionals in different fields, including medical field. And now, even if the war is over and everybody goes back and somehow they find a way to live together as friends, forgetting what happened in the conflict, it's not the same human resources that they had. They had very strong human resources, but now when they go back, especially the youth that has been refugee for the last 5 years, they will not have the same education, skills, life skills, so chances of falling back into armed conflict is extremely high. And drinking water, we already spoke. The access to drinking water, last class we described how much drinking water would be normal. In Europe, approximately one person uses 150 liters of drinking water per day, which includes shower, cleaning, drinking, etc., etc. So we are speaking in humanitarian crisis, 30 liters per day, the first days, which is the worst, and then it goes 60. Humanitarians would already think that it's already good. We move away, let the development guys do the job. Which, if you compare our 150 liters with 60 liters that people have to live on, of course, infectious diseases will dominate there. So, food insecurity, there are 5 phases that are recognized of food insecurity. The first is normal, then it's no nutritional food insecurity problem. Stressed, but again it's fine. The third is acute. So I was trying to bring the tool that MSF uses to measure malnutrition. This is, we call it MUAC, which is body mass. It's measuring how much muscle the child has. So severe acute malnutrition when it is 18 millimeters. And 18 millimeters is like this. So if a child is 2 years, 3 years, after 5 years, you use the same one, and the arm is this big. This is, okay, it's this child. So how you measure? So this child for sure is severely acute malnourished, and the treatment is not about food. The treatment is already a medical process that needs to be, because the child who hasn't eaten for a very long time, you cannot put back on feeding rice. So it has to be special paste with special oils in it. So it's quite a long and laborious process that takes a child to put back on food. And it's measured with already prevalence of how many. Prevalence is total number and which percentage of it. And when it's general acute malnutrition, which is moderate plus severe, when it's 30%, it's a major humanitarian crisis. And the fifth final one is famine, when people start dying. It looks a very small number, 2 deaths per 10,000 people. You will say, okay, everywhere 2 people die of 10,000. But when you have 2 people dying out of 10,000 because of hunger, if you don't react very quickly, the next day it won't be 2, the next day it will be 20, etc., etc. Out of big famines, Ethiopia we remember, Somalia we remember, but this famine word is very political and it's extremely controversial. It's like the word genocide, like you may have mass killings and cleansing of population, but you don't call it a genocide until you want to make it a political statement. The same goes for famine. So it's a very touchy, sensitive word that the humanitarians are very careful to use, unless it's for making a big call for funding or a big political statement. But it is happening right now. Yemen is the country where sometimes UN announces parts of Yemen is affected by famine, sometimes it says Yemen is going into famine. South Sudan, chronic, again, cases of land that the famine is happening. And famine is a product of not one cause, it's not as a result of armed conflict alone, but it's when you have armed conflict. The case of 2013 conflict in South Sudan, again going back, and why the famine was starting, is because of armed conflict. People put their crops here, then the conflict started, they had to move somewhere else, so they didn't have access to what they planted, they didn't get the harvest, and the animals didn't get vaccination, so they lost the cows, they didn't have access to the food they planted, to the harvest. But again, and the droughts as well can cause famine. But usually when you get to the point of famine, it's a combination of many factors. It cannot be only the weather, it cannot be only the conflict, it is a combination of many factors that make the famine. Very interesting readings, if you're interested, additionally I can send you about famine. It will be Case of Famine in Darfur by Alex Dewal, which is an old example, so it's not very political and it's a very good analysis of understanding famine rather than describing the political conflict right now. So, do you recognize this woman?
Yes.
She got the Nobel
Prize.
Huh?
Nobel Prize winner.
She won Nobel Prize.
She was enslaved.
Yes, she was a Yazidi girl who was taken to hostage by ISIS, and she was a sex slave for a long time until she was released, and she spoke out. So now we speak about vulnerability of women and what makes women more vulnerable. Going back to roles and power of women in the family, so we saw that children don't have much decision-making capacity, but even if they make the decisions, they cannot implement it. Women don't have the decision-making power more in the families of access to resources, access to money. Women have much less access. Many of the marriages, especially in the context that we're speaking about, it's an arranged marriage as a result of discussions between the two families. So the power of women in the family, in the society, is not as much as the man to make choices and decisions that would reduce mortality.
But it depends on society.
It depends on society. It depends on society, but I think I would dare to make a generalization. Depends on society, but it varies on how much women have less power in different societies, but I think it's quite universal that in different societies women still are having less decision-making power than in other societies. So, yes, depends on the context, and many of the humanitarian assistance is happening, especially in places where, it's not in Iceland we're speaking about, where women have equal pay rights. We're speaking about places where there is still slave trade. So when there is a conflict, again, women take the first hits, even though they're not fighting directly. It's maternal care, which is the biggest thing. Women don't have access to maternal care because the feldsher runs away or the midwife runs away from the village to a point of village healthcare being destroyed or a woman becoming a refugee, and then you have also increased number of cases of sexual violence, etc. But this is a big factor, and then we'll speak about sexual violence and we'll speak about termination of pregnancies. That in this classroom it won't be a very controversial topic. If it would be in Latin American country, I think I would get more aggressive reaction to it. So sexual and gender-based violence, unfortunately, it has become parts of armed conflicts. There's not many armed conflicts that go without increase in the number of sexual and gender-based violence. It's mostly perpetrated against women by men. But again, I would really avoid to make generalization because, yes, majority of sexual violences are against women by men, but it doesn't mean that majority of men commit sexual violence. Just the topic is a bit sensitive. And of course, it's not only about women. We have many cases of children. In different societies and in different cultures, the age of woman ready for sexual intercourse is different. So perception of when it is rape or when it is a consensual relationship of two adults, there there will be debate there as well. Consequences of sexual violence is another cause of mortality, that there will be lack of follow-up of maternal care if there is a question of termination of pregnancy. But sexual violence has become in a way unfortunately part of the armed conflict. Because there is impunity in armed conflicts, who is to judge? After conflict there are cases, etc., etc., but most of the countries are quite protective of their military. You will not get anybody who hands in their military for committing sexual violences. Sexual violences and rape has been used by many armies historically as a weapon of war, and by militia as well. I can bring a few examples, but I'll try to avoid when it happened, where it happened also. Okay, this one it's an old case. Darfur, example of Darfur. When in the camp or refugee camp, everybody knew that if you go out of the camp, the militia is going to kill you. If you're a man, you go out of the camp to bring charcoal, the grass to cook, the militia is going to kill you. But the community also knew that if women go out, they'll just get raped. So it was a consensus within the refugee camp. I don't think women voluntarily agreed to it, but it was a common perception that it's the chore of a woman to go out of the camp to carry the charcoal, because man will be killed, so women will be only raped. Rape and dignity. In the first part we also read about Taliban mobilizing around dignity of the issue. It has been used in cases of Latin America, rape as a punishment, how it has been used. Well, when it's against a woman, it's a rape. But the rape has also been used, including by different dictators in Chile, in Chile example I remember, when the fathers were forced to watch the rape of the daughter, or the husband was forced to watch the rape of the wife. So it has been a tool to punish, humiliate the dignity of the male figure to get to a point. So it has been quite an acceptable part of war culture. In Central African Republic, I think it's one of the places where rape has been a warfare for militia for a very long time. And another more bad example to show the level of brutality and how institutionalized it was. Women have been kidnapped, raped, to make sure they become pregnant, and at the very late phase of pregnancy, women have been sent back to their community with a tattoo that you're carrying the baby from X nation without giving names. So how it impacts, it's not only destroying the life of this specific woman, it's also destroying the social fabric, because there is no chance this women will get the same acceptance by the community. The child will never be accepted child of the mother. So you will have a child without mother's love, acceptance of community, and it will continue for 3 generations at least, when this community, as a socium, they will just not come together. So rape, sexual violence, but mainly rape, not to generalize, to make it softer, rape has been a tool of warfare historically, and unfortunately wars nowadays are not immune to sexual violence either. And of course, Uganda LRA was targeting boys. It was quite a common practice. And baby girls and the children, young boys have been also targeted. When speaking about elderly, we will see that it's a very unspoken topic of elderly being targeted also for sexual violence. But the evidence is so little, because if women, I think, like, we don't even see the top of the iceberg. But there are already evidences and witnesses that speak. I don't think many elderly women in their 70s would come forward and report a case for us to have a data to know sexual violence being perpetrated against elderly as well. Termination of pregnancies. 13%, this is a general WHO estimate, of maternal mortality is the result of bad abortion. So abortions happen everywhere. Even in the countries with the most severe rules against abortion, women do it no matter what. In Zimbabwe, I read in a report of an anthropologist, and we were working on an HIV project, that women would swallow pieces of batteries. We didn't expect that. It doesn't have to be the case. In South Sudan, it was a very common practice, again, written by anthropologists, and we will see, women would overdose with anti-malarial medicine because malaria is endemic. Every pharmacy or every clock, illegal pharmacy sells lots of anti-malarial drugs. You go, you overdose, and women would have miscarriages. 12 to 13%, and again, this is not an accurate number, but it's a general estimate by the World Health Organization, that maternal mortality is caused by incomplete, wrong, unsafe abortions. So we spoke about the torture part, we spoke about the brutality of rape, but it doesn't end with there. There is also maternal child care of women during pregnancy or after abortion. So this is another big factor how conflict increases abortions. By the way, MSF has a public positioning, and we're not hiding it anywhere, it's on our webpage, that we implement termination of pregnancies in all our countries where it's relevant to our project. Of course, not in projects related to tuberculosis, but in Latin America, where it's a very big issue, in Sudan, in countries where it's illegal, MSF practices termination of pregnancy. It's a policy, it's one of the priorities for MSF to reduce maternal mortality. Of course, infectious diseases, but this is not a woman-specific issue, so if you have a breakdown of healthcare, and healthcare is a very big thing, it's not just presence of doctor. You can have doctor if you don't have a supply of medicine, it's the same as not having treatment anyway. And women in natural disasters, even though our topic was about gender perspective on humanitarian system during the armed conflict, there were very interesting similarities of humanitarian assistance in armed conflict, of spike in cases of rape after natural disasters, that even in the US, the article was comparing Haiti, Katrina in the US, that after the natural disaster was announced, so there is a spike in rape cases. But again, women are more vulnerable than men to natural disasters. Because if an earthquake happens, likelihood of me is to run out directly. The likelihood of woman is to seek for the child, to take the child out. So as a result of which, more women die during natural disasters than men. Plus, the survival skills of women, such as swimming, running away, running faster, also yield to that of men. So it makes women more vulnerable and increases mortality.
And also women are often not allowed to go without men, even in the case of natural disasters or war.
In very extreme
They are
culture,
tied to
yes.
their culture.
Yes, they have to be limited to their visibility, ownership, etc. Which all of those are factors which make mortality among women much higher than mortality among men. And the third group, which Again, I had to base the whole thing on 3 papers, which is extremely limited, but I felt the obligation of speaking about elderly because you don't find much about them, except from HelpAge. But globally, it's only 1% of humanitarian funding that is going to elderly. So imagine, and it's humanitarian funding, it's not general budget. So this is a picture of refugees trying to get to the US. It's the caravans, the recent thing that has made big the front line of caravans from Latin America moving to the United States. This is the Rohingya refugees moving to Bangladesh from Burma. And this is the Aquarius, the rescue ship that MSF had on Mediterranean Sea that got outlawed and banned and stuff. So if we look at these 3 pictures, we don't see old people. So even though we speak about saving lives, etc., where are the old people? And of course, when I'm 70 years old on a wheelchair, chances of me being on these boats or running from military, running away from the military in Burma, or traveling how many kilometers on foot for a 70 years old man with a limp will be a big problem. So, in a way, the elderly remains invisible because we speak of women, we speak of children, vulnerability of children under 5, adolescents, millennials now is the new age group that we speak of. But this is the world's population by age. Of course, it's different from country by country. In developing world, you have more youth and less elderly, whereas in Western world, you will have complete opposite because fertility rate is low and people started living much longer than they used to. The social security is not catching up. So what's happening is we are expecting that by 2050 we will have every 4th person elderly. And the definition of elderly is a person above the age of 60. This is a WHO general definition. We cannot stick to it because there are countries with life expectancy 50 years old, so 60 calling elderly is a bit post-mortem. But there are societies where people live very long. So WHO made it an average of 60 years old, recognizing that it's really generalization that doesn't. So 25% means every 4th person in the community will be above the age of 60. And some figures. So this is a definition of elderly right now. It differs. And the other factor is, I'll come to this, is life expectancy between men and between women is different in every country. Usually it differs 2-3 years between men and between. What is in Ukraine?
10
Yes, so life expectancy for women is 77 and something, for men is 67 or 66 and something. So it's a very big age difference. So if every 4th person is going to be elderly in 2015, we should also understand that chances are, out of the elderly, I think 3/4 would be women, and it's only 1/4 would be men in the demographic understanding of what is elderly. And this is very much the case for all the countries, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less. But when speaking of vulnerability of elderly, we should understand that we're speaking of vulnerability that is predominantly about women. And again, MSF's experience in Ukraine during the armed conflict, what we noticed in the eastern part, that in our clinics, we have 25 mobile clinics that we are running with primary health care. What we didn't announce is the project for elderly. It was a primary health care project. So what we ended up having is that 60-70% of our patients who are coming are above the age of 50, so it's not elderly, but above the age of 50, it's 70%, as I know. 70%?
It's 75.
75% is, it's only 25% of the patients who are coming, 25% of the older people who are coming to us are men, so 75% are women. So we didn't announce project for elderly, we didn't announce project for non-communicable chronic diseases, but we ended up, because the elderly people also have mostly chronic diseases, we ended up treating chronic diseases among people of senior age. So 50, I don't rush to call elderly, but let's say senior age. But this is an issue that is not a Ukrainian-specific phenomenon. We are speaking about urbanization that little by little, world's population is moving to cities. So if they are moving to cities, somebody is staying in the village. The ones who are likely to stay in the village are the elderly people. So the 60% of elderly people also now are in rural communities, whereas the youth is moving to cities to find a job, because in the villages you don't find a job. So how the demographics is changing, and armed conflict makes it more acute, makes it more visible, but even without armed conflict, I think we'll face the situation when the elderly care becomes a major issue. So the other thing about the elderly care and elderly in the humanitarian sector is the legal protection. So there is no really a piece of law that speaks about the elderly protection in general. That's covered under human rights law, which is more general. It doesn't really go of special vulnerabilities or special rights of the elderly people. Geneva Conventions have a reference, but it doesn't have a specific emphasis on elderly. UNHCR in the refugee law has made references, but these are very baby steps to advance. And ICRC mostly relies on customary law. But customary law is not that universally accepted. It's our humanitarian utopia. So this is the customary law. So where are the elderly? And we saw the refugees, we saw people who are escaping. They're not just visible. So what happens is, also, observation and Help Aid is the organization that works with the elderly. It's the only organization specializing on humanitarian assistance for elderly. Keeps on repeating that elderly are left out of all the packages and they are not recognized. Because, again, if we see the case here, what happens, armed conflict, let's say schools are not functioning. So the young families with their children, they have to move somewhere where there is schooling. And healthcare is not functioning. So they move somewhere where there is healthcare. But the elderly care don't have the same adaptability as well. It's not only about the physical ability and willingness, it's also adaptability. I remember my experience in Ukraine. I was speaking to an older man whose house was fully destroyed, like no glasses, quite a difficult situation, and I was asking, like, and the children were in Mariupol. Like, okay, what keeps you here? And his answer was quite simple that I didn't even suspect. He said, okay, I was born here, I lived here all my life. Why would I go to a place I don't know, that I don't know anybody? So, as a result, humanitarian programs are built for those who migrated. We speak about those who migrated. We speak about IDPs. We speak about refugees. But what stays behind, we just don't know. It's not that we don't speak. We just don't know also to speak. So this is a group that doesn't get the share of the assistance that they deserve. And it's not a local example only. I believe it's everywhere, it's just because we don't see. What if the situation is so dire that from Guatemala people are walking thousands of kilometers to get to the US? If it's so bad, so what happened to the ones who didn't make these thousands of kilometers? So we don't know We speak about the rights of those who made this 1,000 kilometers. They're not getting the status of a refugee. They're not getting access. The wall is built. But we speak about them. The ones who didn't make this, so for them it must be much more difficult to stay behind rather than the ones who get some attention at least. So, lack of mobility. So, for women we spoke cultural aspects which makes women less capable to run out. For elderly, if I grow old, chances are I'll have more health problems. I might be disabled, I might have, at least my reflexes won't be like they are now. So if they're shooting my house, I won't be able to run out as fast as the youth will be able to do so. So one very simple, primitive reason why mortality is higher and their vulnerability is higher than among the young, the youth, who can run out quickly, jump into the car, and go. And emotional adaptability that we already covered, there's no evidence, it's a personal opinion, that they don't have the same willingness to change their life at the age of 70. To change the location, to change their friends, to change the community. So, and disability. So, again, very recent report from Help Age that was made in Ukraine and Tanzania, and they were emphasizing especially the vulnerability is much higher among the disabled elderly than among just the older people who don't have disabilities. Well, I think the reasons are quite clear, because there is no care, there is no prosthesis, there is no all the physiotherapy, etc., and the medical care. Non-communicable chronic diseases. So, if for children we said nutrition is the big thing, or for women we said maternal health care is the big thing, among the elderly people, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular diseases, so all the chronic diseases. So when there is a conflict and there is a lack of healthcare, disruption of healthcare, if you're diabetic, you need your dose of insulin on a regular basis. So you get cut off the consistent supply. So this is one of the reasons how it affects the elderly's vulnerability. So okay, many people can have diabetes, but when the conflict occurs, it means disruption, rupture at the regular process of receiving medical care. It doesn't always kill, but it makes things very bad. It depends on what disease we're talking about. A very basic thing that we might have not suspected of the bliss of having teeth, and how it affects our ability. I have a public health specialist friend who is a dentist, and she says this is the most important part of healthcare, because if you're not able to chew and digest your food, then your healthcare is over. And in a way, there is a big share of truth in it. So, if you're in a conflict area, and especially older people in developing poorer countries, so it is quite a basic thing that we might not have noticed, but they just don't get to digest what they eat, or they don't get enough nutrition, and out of the not enough, they also don't manage to digest. So it's a big issue that is more common for elderly care. Nutrition, which is linked more with dental care rather than in general nutrition. Hearing and visual aid. When we were building our program as well in Ukraine, like, well, if there is a shelling, what is more important, my insulin or my ability to see how to run out? Because many people have problem with their glasses, and many people haven't seen a doctor for a very long time. So hearing aid, visual aid, that maybe we take for granted that we have, but in this age, many people won't have the same advantages, and it can be during conflict very devastating. The other interesting element was systematic exclusion of elderly people from different healthcare packages. So we would assume that if you're 60 years old, the sexual life is over. So there was a research that shows how elderly people have never been considered for programs such as HIV, or sexually transmitted infections, or maternal health care. Like, they haven't seen a gynecologist for ages already. It's just assumed that if you're a 70 years old woman, or man, no sex is happening, so people can live 20, 30 years with the same sexually transmitted infection without even knowing that they have it. And the humanitarian programs with this pre-assumption that, okay, what are you doing 70 years old? Let the young come and get the condoms and get the treatment and get the testing. So they are systematically excluded from certain programs, including from tuberculosis, etc. If you go deep, you will understand that in some cases the elderly yield to give the youth more opportunities for access, and in other cases we just assume that they just don't do it. And mental health. Again, among elderly people, the probability of loss of memory. During conflict, we speak of PTSD, especially if they have had a first-hand exposure to armed conflict. But again, they don't necessarily receive the assistance on mental health. Mental health is a topic that in armed conflict here, there has been lots of discussion, and MSM has also integrated mental health into our primary healthcare package, which turned into treatment of non-communicable diseases and mental health. It's spread across the contact line, but mental health is a part of it. And interesting observation that what we notice on our skin is initially, among this, before there were more clinics, now it's 25, initially what we would see that many of the people who go to psychologists, they speak about PTSD, they share the fear, anxiety, they're afraid of more shelling, anxiety, loss, etc. But more and more with time, we see a deviation of the complaints that we have from our patients, and we hear more of them speaking about being alone. Because it's already the elderly people that are living alone, that the youth has moved away for work, for security, for schooling, etc. So it's already a grievance of an older person who is not physically fit enough. Of course, the pension is way not enough for decent survival. So we see a situation that their grievances is moving from PTSD and alarms, and more you hear of people feeling lonely, and it's a natural thing. Again, the conflict brings it up, makes it more acute. I don't think the situation would be different in, I don't know, in the suburb of Shanghai, where the children moved away and the elderly are left there. So it is going to be more of a global thing. And elderly natural disasters, again, for the same reason why we were speaking about the women that they will run to look for the child before running out, their skills to swim, to cross, or their skills to run fast. So elderly have the same vulnerabilities. Differences in the case of women, there is a social gender responsibilities attached to women that woman has to try to catch up. But in the case of elderly people, they just physically cannot be so active to run, to jump, to get into the first car, to move, which makes them, of course, very vulnerable and increases the mortality. And speaking of mortality, there is very little data on mortality of elderly care, which I guess also comes from, there is a very rich evidence of elderly mortality among children under 5. that we know at which phase, infant mortality, child mortality, etc. There is rich data on maternal mortality that analyzes humanitarian and public health system, but there is very little data on mortality of elderly in different circumstances, so we don't know what it was, what it is, what is the right, what is the acceptable indicators for us to take into consideration. We just know that the mortality among the elderly, we assume that it will be much higher than the mortality among the youth in the case of natural disaster or an armed conflict. Okay? So, I think this is it. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Okay, we discussed this before. Then you talk about vulnerability of elderly. In fact, you talk about single elderly. So they do not have children, or children what they left them alone in places.
Yes, the thing is, it is calculated, not if we speak about conflict. Even if we don't speak about conflict, the pension fund and social security systems globally has been calculated, assuming a different life expectancy. So now life expectancy has changed in countries. There are places that it has gone to 80 as a normal age. Now the world is usually around 80 life expectancy. Whereas the social contributions that people make throughout their lives is not anymore enough to keep people up to the age of 80. Plus, in the same countries, there is a difference in fertility rate. So there are less children or less people paying taxes to keep the bigger number of elderly who live longer with the pensions going. So this is a problem that is in general, plus with the urbanization rate, and in case of armed conflict, many people move. So yes, it's about elderly people who are left alone, but because of employment, because of conflict, the probability of being left alone is becoming extremely high.
But children can take parents' duties and help, especially in the case of armed conflict.
It doesn't always happen that sometimes parents don't want to move, sometimes children cannot afford it. Labor migration in the region is quite a common thing. How many people go for seasonal labor, how many people go for permanent, they never know. It's for a few years. It's not seasonal, but it's for a few years. So in these cases, the elderly stay. There are some villages that it was interesting, we noticed. You have elderly and you have kids, because the parents went to earn money, so the grandmothers and grandfathers were taking care of children. So this is also quite common. Yeah, if children manage to take care, it would be good, but in very many cases...
And you mentioned in Ukraine, you talk, these elderly people come, so is it in the occupied territory or in...
MSF works only in government.
So they already moved if they
children,
come to
Well, there are also elderly people who moved away. It's not only that all the elderly stayed, but there are many families that the way the split happened, and it's not necessarily if the school is destroyed in the village and you have a school-age child, you have to come to a compromise of moving with your family fully, or you move alone. It depends already on financial abilities, the job you find in another place where there is a school. Sometimes you can afford having parents, sometimes parents don't want to join you. So factors are varied already, family internal arrangements that they make. But yes, we're speaking about elderly who have been left alone. And more elderly are really left alone with time, with the high urbanization. They're all very flexible. I don't know, especially with my job during the last year, I don't know how many countries I worked with. So you don't move with your parents so often to different places, and we all are more likely to move from place to place for a job. So it is a growing problem. So far, elderly count 16% of total population, but by 2050, estimate is that it will be 50% of the population. Quarter, 25%.
can talk a lot about this application of analysis for gender perspective to Ukraine, because Ukraine is more gender balanced than all this religion and these countries.
Well, as analysis, I don't know. I think if I speak about gender perspective and our operations in Ukraine, I can speak about the elderly people. That was a striking thing, and that we have 75% of patients who come the women, and we have a big majority of patients who are older people. So this I can say, but in general, how the conflict, to speak about the conflict and the gender perspective of conflict, I don't know, the examples, if I try to reflect, we don't have mother and child health care, nutrition is not the issue in Ukraine, so these factors are not striking to speak that, okay, maternity ward was destroyed and you have spike of maternal mortality. So this is not the case, or abortion is not, termination of pregnancies in Ukraine is not a forbidden topic, it's not illegal. So we cannot, on our experience, because we also don't do it, but we monitor the healthcare situation in general. These are not the topic that would be Ukraine specific. But the elderly would be more Ukraine specific. And it was analysis of HelpAge on a report they published comparing Tanzania and Ukraine and the situation of elderly in armed conflict here. There is disproportionately higher number of elderly people affected by conflict here than in other conflicts, than in other places. It could be because Ukraine, as a more industrial country, already the families looking for jobs and migration, internal migration, so there was already a fertile soil of elderly staying and the youth moving, and conflict made it very explicit. But HelpAge describes that Ukraine suffers a big disproportionate numbers of elderly and youth affected by armed conflict.
Also arms, which are used in the conflict, are different probably from Sudan, because I don't think they use it heavily in government there, right? So this is more like...
I know, arms is not my expertise
yeah, but like if there is a bombing, then it's like, I think we have more civil casualties. That's my perception. But,
no, I guess I wouldn't say. Like from number, I can say in Ukraine, well, targeting of military health facilities, targeting of schools. You have it in all places, and the UN data show that in Ukraine many health facilities have been targeted. But no, I don't think it's much different than if you examine Syria when the hospitals have been bombarded. South Sudan, I cannot compare Ukraine to South Sudan because South Sudan has been in war for the last 37 years. So, and a very active war, and whole country war, it's not like
but not with
Ukraine.
Iran, right? Not with the heavy battle.
Oh, yes, everything. It's a war without laws, so you have to go. So 37 years of war, I can say that yes, you rarely find people who have the education, you rarely find people who haven't suffered the armed conflict. Everybody will tell you personal stories that you think that are possible only in books. So yeah, 37 years of war has very deep scars. I don't think it will get through. It's very, very tragic, but it's a very self-perpetuating conflict. So it's difficult to compare, but I wouldn't think that use of arms, etc., makes it one. Other questions, comments?
Thank you very much. It was really interesting.
You had a question?
I just was curious how you conduct needs assessments for humanitarian assistance when you're in, the fifth year of the conflict. How often are you reviewing which communities need more support?
of which communities needs assessment, I can say the case of MSF again, because in general needs assessment, livelihood analysis, we spoke during the last session we had. I can speak about the health assessment. So when in South Sudan, for example, my experience, we were going to a new place because we know politically it's very sensitive. It's located in a place next to another tribe in the middle of conflict, so we go to do an assessment. So the first thing you need to understand is demographics, to have a general picture. Nutrition, doing WAC, which will give you an indication not about food security or nutrition in general. If you have a high WAC rate, then it means also you have a high prevalence of all kinds of diseases and you will have high mortality. So nutrition and health and water and sampling water are quite interlinked. So for water sanitation, you assess how many water pumps are there, if there is availability of soaps, if there are latrines, how many latrines versus the population, so you know that if there are not enough latrines, there must be high prevalence of gastrointestinal diseases, or if you have not enough water, you know you have a different problem. For nutrition, you do analysis. For healthcare, we will go around. So these are the basic analysis for you to draw the first conclusions. There is also qualitative analysis that you do. You have interviews with households to understand about the numbers of households. You ask, like, did somebody die in your family during the last 3 months? You decide on, depends on how severe is the context. Yes, no, how did the person die? So you try to understand if there is a prevalence, if you have same ways described, the person was shaking and died, you know that there is malaria they are talking about, so you're in a malaria prevalent area. So there are both qualitative and quantitative methods you do. Again, last time I said it's not academia, humanitarian role, so many things you do assuming and by instincts, but there are tools worked out for it. Most of the time you don't have the time to use the tools, and they are not also accurate enough. You have rumors that 3 people died of diarrhea, then you put on your clothes and take a climb and you go to the cholera project. So it doesn't mean that there is a cholera. So I know it's not as accurate, but there are tools indicated in different. MSF webpage has free access to different protocols also of doing assessment. I think the book is called Humanitarian Assessment in Refugee Camps. It's in MSF library that you can check. Anything?
One more question. You mentioned that the share of humanitarian aid spent on the help to elderly is very small. Why? Can you explain by some utilitarian?
It is a personal opinion again, I cannot explain why. In the article that you will receive, I sent, in the article it says, first of all, the probability, it's a very neutral article, not to offend anybody, probability is that humanitarians don't have this set of skills to address the elderly needs. So there is no research done and you don't know what to do. Then measuring mortality for elderly is also another thing. So when you have a 3-year-old child, it's not normal mortality. If I'm 75 and I die, to call it a mortality or to call it a humanitarian crisis because you have spike of mortality. This is another arguable point of to write it or not to write it, what to do. The other thing, personal opinion again, elderly care is quite expensive. So if you dive into elderly care, you will go into palliative care, you cannot avoid it. Palliative care with pain management, hospices, etc. In the middle of armed conflict, when you're on save life mode, on industrial scale, you're saying how much you invest into death with dignity versus vaccinated children for not to die. It's no right or wrong answers, but it's a dilemma again that the humanitarians have to make. Wheelchairs, protheses, all of these things are also quite expensive, that you can do a bigger life-saving mission with the same amount of money. I think there is both economic explanation. There is our knowledge, that we don't have much knowledge. We don't see the elderly people, and we didn't develop the knowledge as well. I think it will come very soon. It will be the new topic of humanitarian.
Yeah, from my opinion, I would say this is a common thing you see in the humanitarian field, is kind of ignoring chronic diseases and focus on things that have a quicker solution, vaccinations, malnutrition, etc. But as conflicts become more protracted and as displacement becomes more protracted, and more conflicts are occurring in middle-income countries, we're seeing an increase in a need for chronic disease to be considered within the humanitarian field. So Syria was one of the first examples where you see a large amount of people displaced with chronic diseases that need treatment. So I think it's definitely a trend that's growing.
To an evolution, a very vulgar way of describing the evolution of humanitarian systems. It all started like as a bigger movement after the Second World War. It was big attention on health, infectious diseases. But again, to be very cynical, you invest money on infectious diseases in the other world for them not to reach to your world. And you invest money on refugee management for you to have just enough labor but not too much. The second phase of humanitarianism became more human when you start looking into non-communicable diseases that won't infect you, like how much money went into HIV versus how much money went into hypertension. It's like this. But the second phase, I would say, it is more human, and it's looking into non-communicable diseases. And we are entering a new phase that more and more we are discussing hospices, palliative care. In the case of MSF, we are trying to integrate palliative care in all our projects. It's a big expanse for 3 people to have dignified death, which can last a long period. You need a social worker, a psychologist, you need a doctor, and a painkiller, and narcotics, etc. So, with time, I believe there is a movement towards being more human, rather than more managing demography and public health. I'm hopeful. Okay. All right then. Thank you all very much. And,